With 3 regions down, our next stop on the worst Pokemon tour is none other than Sinnoh. The land of too many HMs, not enough fire types, and a surprising number of pretty bad Pokemon. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and these are the worst Pokemon in the Sinnoh region. Right off the bat, I'm immediately conflicted on who the worst early game normal type in the Sinnoh region should be, because Bibarel and Lopunny are having the mid-off of a lifetime right over there. Lopunny has slightly better stats than Bibarel, that's for sure, but Bibarel's 3 abilities are surprisingly broken for a relatively useless beaver. One of these is Simple, which doubles this Pokemon's stat changes. So when Bidoof or Bibarel use Defense Curl, they get +2 defense instead of +1. The most broken move that Bibarel can use with this is Curse, which would double both its attack and defense stats, but much like your average Christian dad, Bibarel doesn't learn Curse until he's in his 50s. So that point is sadly pretty irrelevant. However, in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Bibarel can use Sword Stance to get +4 attack and then rip off some nasty quick attacks and Aqua Jets, so that's something at least. Meanwhile, Lopunny has 2 pretty awful abilities, with Klutz in particular being one of the worst in the entire game. Furthermore, Lopunny is a friendship evolution, which means it's going to take significantly longer to evolve than Bibarel, who just evolves at level 15. Also, Baneri is very cruelly the only Pokemon to evolve this way that starts with 0 friendship instead of the usual base 70. Evolving this thing is sadly going to be a lot harder than a simple walk in the park. And honestly, since Bibarel is so much more accessible, and not to mention can also access basically every relevant HM in Sinnoh, I actually think Bibarel is a lot better than Lopunny within the region of Sinnoh itself. Yes, Lopunny has a Mega Evolution, but Megas didn't come back for the remakes, so it's never been usable in any Sinnoh game ever. Lopunny does have a lot more tools that admittedly make it work better in a competitive environment than Bibarel does, but I judge main story viability above all else in these videos. Which means good news to all Bibarel fans, your boy gets to walk out of here scot-free. Number 9, Carnivine. Carnivine sticks out as one of the few Sinnoh Pokemon with really nothing significant about it. It doesn't evolve, it's a mono grass type, it doesn't have a neat signature move or ability, it truly feels like a filler Pokemon for the most part. Even none of its stats other than attack manage to break 100. It's just an underwhelming Pokemon from every angle. With that being said, there's a reason why Carnivine is only number 9 on this list. It does show up at a decent point in the story, being catchable right before fighting Crash or Wake. And assuming you're not using the infinitely better grass types of Roserade or Torterra, it could be a good last-minute Nuzlocke catch for the gym fight, well, if you have TMs at least. In BDSP, Carnivine at least gets access to Grass Knot and Leaf Tornado when you need it most, but in the original Gen 4 games, Carnivine was stuck with Vine Whip as its only attacking grass moves until level 47 when it finally learned Power Whip. Yeah, if this was just Gen 4 Carnivine I was ranking, he'd be way higher up on the list. Because unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, Carnivine is really only helping you for Wake. After this battle, he doesn't beat another significant trainer for the rest of the game, aside from Bertha and the Elite Four. But if you don't have a better grass or water type by then, something has gone horribly wrong. And speaking of which, number 8, Lumineon. The only real redeeming factor behind Lumineon is that it's at least a water type. Perhaps the worst water type in Sinnoh, but a water type nonetheless. Which means it can assist with the many Steelix in Byron's gym and matches up decently well against the Sinnoh League, most notably against Bertha and Flint. It does have Swift Swim, which means you can teach it Rain Dance to make it a somewhat okay Rain Sweeper, even if it is outclassed by virtually every other Swift Swim user in the Sinnoh region, including Floatzel, who's been available from the literal start of the game. But hey, say if you're Nuzlocking and you've lost literally every other water type in existence, Lumineon is not the worst contingency plan. It's just a really, really bad one. Number 7, Phione. Yes, this actually is a Pokemon that you can use during the main story, if you're willing to put an astronomical amount of work in. In Gen 4, it just requires transferring the Manaphy Egg over and then trading in a Ditto to breed with it, or by receiving the Manaphy Egg that was available during Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl's launch. But the question is, why would you want to? It's already more work than it's worth just to get Phione, and Phione is literally just a worse version of Manaphy. From a purely this Pokemon sucks compared to another Pokemon aspect, you could argue that Phione deserves to be number 1 on this list because of Manaphy. But I do acknowledge that Phione is at least somewhat better than the Pokemon below it. Still not as good as Lumineon though. It doesn't even have Swift Swim like Lumineon does, and at least Lumineon levels up really fast, as it's one of the few Pokemon to be a part of the Erratic EXP group. Meanwhile, since Phione is just this weird pseudo-mythical thingamabobber, it levels up horrendously slowly. It's not going to keep pace no matter how hard you try. Number 6, Cherrim. If Phione was a worse version of Lumineon, then Cherrim is most certainly a worse version of Carnivine. Let's start with its pre-evolved form, Cherubi. Cherubi is already one of the hardest Pokemon to find in Sinnoh, due to the fact that it exclusively appears as one of those obnoxiously rare honey tree encounters. It's not as rare as Munchlax or anything, but still annoying. And unlike Carnivine, who is at least fully evolved by the time you find it, you have to struggle to use one of the worst Pokemon in existence all the way until it finally evolves at level 25. Did I mention that in Gen 4, Cherubi doesn't even learn a single Grass-type move until level 19? Haha, good luck! Not that it really matters though, because there is literally no benefit to owning a grass type at this point in the game. Cherubi already misses out on Roark, who is fought before you get access to honey trees. It's no help against Gardenia or Maylene. It's pretty much just eating up a slot on your team until you reach Crasher Wake, which again, at that point, just catch a Carnivine if you're in that much trouble. Anyway, when Cherubi does finally evolve into Cherrim, it becomes, you guessed it, another very bad gimmick Pokemon. Yay! I was just thinking that we were missing something from this video. Cherrim's gimmick is that it transforms in strong sunlight, while at the same time activating its signature ability Flower Gift, which raises its attack and special defense to rather random stats by 50%. This buff was virtually meaningless in Gen 4, as the only physical move it could naturally learn was Takedown. In BDSP, they at least give it the decently powerful physical move of Petal Blizzard, but not until level 41. But on that note, BDSP also took away Cherrim's ability to learn Play Rough from Sword and Shield, so it still lacks any substantial coverage. And this is all while considering that Grass still ain't even that good in Sinnoh. Hi, if you're enjoying the video so far, then be sure to subscribe. We still have 5 regions left to go, so don't miss out. Number 5, Bastiodon. Long before Zacian and Zamazenta's battle of the Sword and Shield, we had Rampardos and Bastiodon, who gave us a far less interesting version of this matchup. Yes, I'm aware that the Bastiodon Mafia exists and they somehow managed to make this Pokemon match up against certain legendaries really well in the Scarlet and Violet VGC meta. But yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again, purely defensive Pokemon are sadly not built for main story playthroughs. The war of attrition is a hard one for them to win. Now take that logic and apply it to Bastiodon, a Pokemon with absolutely horrid defensive typing, as Rock strips away most of the benefits that Steel would have provided. Not to mention that a much better Pokemon with this same typing is also present in this region. Well, at least in the one Sinnoh game that actually matters. As Probopass can actually be obtained as early as level 15 in Platinum by catching and immediately evolving a Nosepass in Mount Coronet on the Eterna City side of the mountain. Man, 2 regions in a row where Probopass has been an oddly convenient Pokemon to use. Who would have thought? But sadly, that just makes Bastiodon's stock value look like Hawktua Coin, who has to wait until level 30 to reach its final form. From there, Bastiodon is only somewhat useful in Candace's gym. I say somewhat because there's an odd amount of fighting type Pokemon there, so even that isn't as easy as you would think. And like, maybe he beats a few Pokemon on Aaron's team in the Elite Four. The problem is, I can't even say he confidently wins that either, because what is he dealing damage with? Not Body Press, he didn't get that until Gen 9. And without that move, he can't really do anything. On that note, without TMs, this Pokemon is absolutely cooked in Sinnoh. It only has Ancient Power until level 51 when it finally gets its only other stab move, Iron Head. So unless you enjoy making Sinnoh's battles even slower than they already are, you should definitely steer clear of Bastiodon. Number 4, Purugly. Oh yeah, remember Lopunny and Bibarel from the beginning of this video? Man, they feel so much better compared to what we're getting into now. Ignoring the fact that Glameow and Purugly are only usable in Pearl and Shining Pearl, let's focus on how annoying it is just to use these Pokemon. Despite having stats that look like they came straight from Route 201, Glameow isn't even catchable until just before the 6th gym. It's like teaching your kid how to do addition and subtraction before they go off to high school. So yippee, you caught yourself a level 30 Glameow. Why? I don't know. It's not like it beats anything significant at this point in the game. But at least it should evolve right away, right? Haha, wrong again, Buster. For whatever reason, Glameow doesn't evolve until level 38. Is this a Gen 5 Pokemon in disguise? And then, and only then, do you get Purugly, who has somewhat acceptable stats. I'm sorry, and Mars gets to use one of these things at level 16? No wonder that boss fight was so hard. Purugly is a Pokemon you're meant to get at level 20, not level 38. You'd be better off suffering through Baneri's obnoxious friendship evolution. At least if you run a marathon across the Sinnoh region, you might get it somewhat early. Even comparing it strictly to Lopunny without the evolution nonsense, Lopunny gets so much better coverage and has much better bulk for only a few less points in attack and speed. The nicest thing I can say about Purugly is that in BDSP with the heart scale you can teach it Play Rough. So, funnily enough, it's actually kind of a good counter for Cynthia's Garchomp as one of the only Pokemon in the game that outspeeds it. But that's it, you're literally carrying a useless Pokemon around for 10 plus hours just to fight one Pokemon. And even then, a Abomasnow with Ice Shard accomplishes the same thing with less tedium. Number 3, Chatot. Chatot is yet another Pokemon who really only exists as a gimmick to tie into the Nintendo DS's microphone. You wanna know how I know that? Because this Pokemon is only available right before Volkner's Gym, where he loses! Does that sound like a Pokemon that was designed with love and care and attention? No, it sounds like a Pokemon that was made because Nintendo told them to. In fact, the only reason I can confidently say that Chatot is not in the top 2 is because BDSP added a trade in Eterna City where you can get Chatot pretty early. And honestly, as an early game Pokemon, it's actually not terrible. It's got 91 speed and 92 special attack. Heck, that's enough to beat Gardenia and Maylene. Not too bad, honestly. And if you're playing competitively, you can teach Chatot Boom Burst, which may be only one good move, but it's one good move that none of these other Pokemon have. But I do have to balance across all games, and seeing as how Chatot is only situationally useful in 2 out of the 5 Sinnoh-based games, and even then, only for a little while, I can't say it's any better than this. The moment Staraptor is available, Chatot is getting dumped off the team, assuming you even knew that you could get him that early in BDSP. But at least I can say, the spirit of Chiding saved Chatot from being any higher. Thank you for in-game trades. Number 2, Wormadam. My editor told me I should just leave it at that, but I actually do want to elaborate on this one. You would think a Pokemon with 3 different variants would have at least one that's somewhat useful, but sadly, that is not the case. I mean, one of them is literally called Trash Form, so that one speaks for itself. Okay, positives in Gen 4. There are none. Positives in BDSP? It learns Quiver Dance now. That's kinda good. Well, just for the grass one, honestly. It's really not that big of a benefit for the other 2. And even then, Wormadam Plant Cloak doesn't learn its only good damage-dealing moves until levels 47 and 50 with Leaf Storm and Bug Buzz. So, truthfully, you're really not even benefiting from Quiver Dance for 90% of the game. And then, when you finally get your good moves, oh boy, you get thrashed by almost all the late-game trainers. And the other forms are no different. They also don't learn any useful moves until level 47. And really, that's the biggest offense that Wormadam commits over most of the other Pokemon on this list. It is just bent on doing absolutely nothing for most of the game. I mean, their brother Mothim is not much better, but he at least learns some decent attacking moves relatively soon after evolving. Mothim might be a really, really bad Quiver Dance sweeper, but at least it can say it does that. Wormadam can't do anything. They had 3 shots and airballed all 3 of them. These things somehow made Cherrim look good in comparison. Now that's hard to do. And now, like always, it is time for our dishonorable mentions. The first one is rather strange. It's actually Rotom. This is technically a main story Pokemon only in Platinum. However, if you aren't replaying the game in 2009, I have bad news. His alternate forms, which are really the only reason you would use Rotom, are sadly no longer available. In fact, the only Sinnoh-based games you can now get Rotom's alternate forms is Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But he has sadly reverted to a post-game only catch like he was in Diamond and Pearl because these remakes were faithfully terrible. However, Rotom's forms, particularly Wash, are undeniably good in competitive contexts. Next is Rampardos, who is not nearly as bad as Bastiodon, at least in a main story playthrough. Honestly, in competitive, Rampardos is probably even worse than Bastiodon. But hey, if you just want to smash stuff up and throw caution to the wind, he's not the worst main story Pokemon ever. He at least has an impeccable attack stat and high enough speed to easily defeat many of the more minor trainers in the game. And lastly is Pachirisu. But in all honesty, Pachirisu doesn't face much competition from electric types in this region. Outside of Platinum, I'm pretty sure you only have access to the Shinx and Pikachu families. So if you're Nuzlocking, there's plenty of opportunities for Pachirisu to be your standout electric type. And of course, it's a world champion. Yes, I know, I was there, literally. It doesn't mean a lot in a main story context, but it is something to consider. And now, for the number 1 worst Pokemon in the Sinnoh region. Yeah, nope, sorry, I'm not counting Male Combi, that just feels like cheating. But I will count an almost equally bad bug type, Kricketune. Yeah, I know, whoop, yeah, the cry is cool. Can you tell me anything else about this Pokemon? Yeah, didn't think so. Before Gen 5 radically overhauled the idea of what a bug type could be, Kricketune is that last vestige of the stereotype that they are nothing more than terrible early game Pokemon. I'd like to say, hey, at least he evolves at level 10, that's a pretty big positive. until you realize he doesn't beat Rourke, and by the time you reach Gardenia, he's already painfully outclassed stat-wise. Unlike virtually every other Pokemon on this list who has received some sort of a buff over time, Kricketune has gotten worse! It at least got X-Scissor kind of early in Diamond and Pearl at level 26, but even that got moved back in every subsequent game after they added Slash to its learn set, which frankly just isn't nearly as good. They also took Leech Life out of its level up moveset in the remakes because God forbid this Pokemon have one usable move early in the game. Kricketune has probably lost more good moves since Gen 4 than it has gained. And even if Kricketune stayed exactly the same as it did in Gen 4, it would still be worse due to the fact that every other Pokemon has gotten better. I can name at least one redeeming factor about every other Pokemon on this list. Bastiodon has a small niche in VGC. Purugly has really good speed. Chatot has Boom Burst. Wormadam has Quiver Dance. What does Kricketune have? Peace of mind that nobody is going to catch him? That might be the only thing. And with that, my peace of mind has been disrupted knowing the Pokemon this bad still exist 4 generations in. But hey, if you want to make it better, then be sure to like this video and subscribe for more videos just like this one. I'll see you guys next time.